All right, so let's see. We're talking about cold cycling, especially in the extreme cold. Um, so for somebody that's never cycled in the extreme cold before and that's interested in maybe taking a trip in Siberia or maybe doing the Pamir Highway in the winter, I mean, what should they prepare? How where would we even what should we bring?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first things first is if you're thinking of doing it, definitely go and do it. It's a really rewarding way of cycling because it's so tough and so everything is just focused on the experience of cycling. There's no extras. You're just focused on cycling and staying alive, and that's a really rewarding experience actually in that simplicity. But yeah, what to bring and how to prepare. I mean, it goes without saying that you need a lot of warm clothes and your sleeping setup has got to be pretty toasty if you're gonna camp. Layers are always better than just one thick item of clothing. So definitely layer up with lots of smaller layers and then a thick one on top of that. Probably the best advice is just see what the locals are doing. So, in Russia, we've already said, they gave me a lot of their clothes, but they also gave me good advice. Like, okay, if you're making a campfire, get a big rock. And if you put that in the fire, heat it right up, and then put that in your tent, then that just gives off some heat all during the night. That's like a hot water bottle in your tent. So little tips like that are invaluable, really. The main thing is just don't. I think to accept that it's going to be hard and it's going to be challenging and you're going to go slow. I mean, there's no point trying to plan 100-mile days because you just won't do it because you'll be grinding out and everything takes longer. Do a practice trip if you can, build it up. I mean, I was building it up through Pamir highways. I didn't go straight into Siberia. I had that experience to draw on. And I think a lot of just sensible precautions, knowing if things go wrong, what your backups will be. If you've got any places that you can go to that will be warm. If places like if you're in the middle of nowhere, where's the nearest town? How will you get there, etc. But you can read and hear people talking, but the best way to learn is just by doing. So just get out there and give it a go and build it up really, and start with 1 or 2 days in the snow, 1 a day, 2-day bike trips, and build that up to a week, and then maybe a couple of weeks. Yeah, learn by experience, learn by doing.
Sure. I'd imagine in Siberia too. I mean, in the colder parts in the winter, you do get cars there, right? Quite a few, and you could always hitch right to a town, right? If you in an emergency situation where you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in if you're as long as you're not really remote, will always be some people around. I mean, humans are really good at surviving in crazy, inhospitable places, and they do. So the chances are someone's done it before, and someone will be there already. So just remember that.
Yeah, sure. Have you ever you've heard of a guy named Wim Hof who does all the crazy extreme cold challenges?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what the guy focuses on is breathing and sort of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tunha breathing. It's supposed to warm up your body.
Mm.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it, but I mean, it seems to work.
So that's even more impressive that you cycled through Siberia without doing that. But he does this whole breathing thing that warms up his body.
Yeah, I wish I'd known that when I was there.
Yeah, so anyway, so after Siberia, you take the boat from Vladivostok to South Korea. So how was the boat ride and how was the transition from going to South Korea?
The boat was fun. there was a bit of karaoke, which it was very Korean themed actually. The boat more than Russian. I think it was a Korean company that ran it. So I had Korean fried chicken and ate with chopsticks on the boat. Yeah, that was fun. I mean, coming into South Korea was just such a culture shock compared to Russia. Russia is big, empty. You know, I was following one road basically my whole time in Russia. I didn't have to think about navigating or bike lanes. I could speak the language. I could read the script. I knew exactly what I was going to get from the supermarkets. And then I'd been in Russia for quite a long time and I'd forgotten what it was like to be in a new country and have all these things to be unknown. So when I got to Korea and suddenly there's an alphabet that, okay, I was trying to learn, but I couldn't really read it at the time. And, you know, all these foods that I had no idea what they were, a load of different roads. I remember having a joyful experience where I realized I didn't have to just cycle on the main road. I could take this quiet mountain road where there would be no traffic. And everything just felt very calm in Korea. Surprisingly so, even though it was a more densely populated country and everything worked. The toilets were clean. The toilets had Wi-Fi. You could camp and no one would bother you. The supermarkets, everything was organized and I don't know, like apples were individually wrapped. It was just completely different from Russia, where it was all sort of a bit haggly and I was kind of bartering around for food and drink. I mean, I enjoyed Korea. I didn't really make the most of it that time because, to be honest, I was completely dead from Russia, and I just limped through in about 5 days to Seoul. And I'd lost a lot of weight because of Russia. I was cold all the time. I didn't really have much energy to cycle through the Korean mountains. I didn't realize Korea was so mountainous. I mean, good gracious. Yeah, I was going up more mountains than I could expect. But the people seemed warm and friendly, and I enjoyed the service from the restaurants, when they give you free food. Everyone was very respectful. So yeah, I enjoyed that and very helpful. So on the outskirts of Seoul, unfortunately, my bike just completely broke. My bottom bracket seized up. But people pointed me to the nearest bike shop, and then when they couldn't fix it, they phoned up another bike shop in another town and got on the train there, and they couldn't fix it, and they sent me on a train to Seoul. So yeah, it was very different from Russia.
Sure. And then you came to Seoul quite a few times too, and you spent a while in South Korea, like a few weeks, right? So I mean, how was it overall? I mean, like after spending a few weeks there, what were your impressions of the people and the culture and overall, like the city?
Yeah, I loved Seoul. It was and I got to see it in winter and summer and spring and all the different seasons. I thought, I mean, it's a huge city, but it didn't feel big in some places. Every little neighborhood had a bit of green space that you could escape to and enjoy the sanctuary. And I remember we sort of walked around and you showed me those little parks, and you sit in one of them and you would never think you're in a city of I don't know how many million people. But at the same time, you've got the nightlife if you want there, you've got the busyness, you've got the bike paths, which are lovely. And like I say, everything just works in South Korea. Like the buses run on time, they're clean, the streets are clean, there's green space, there's not much litter, the bike paths are good. I enjoyed it down by the Han River. The people were friendly, the people are beautiful. Yeah, I had a great time in Seoul, and by the time I came back, it just felt like coming back to home almost. It's like I knew my way around. I even knew the little chime that the metro trains use when they arrive at the station. So everything just felt familiar after a while.
Nice. Yeah, right. Yeah, I remember we'd go up to the park right by my house. It's like a 10-minute walk from my apartment, in a park with a little forested area, and then like tennis courts, a big 300-meter track with some outdoor like weights and pull-up bars, and just great public facilities. We did
Yeah,
some
exactly.
interval training there, right, on the track, right? That was fun.
Yeah, it just seemed that the citizens were looked after in Seoul. It's a very livable city, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, totally. And you can walk to the convenience store in like 2 minutes
Yeah,
from anywhere you are. There's a convenience store within a 2-minute walk, right?
and I love the food, especially those sweet. I can't remember the name of them, but
Oh,
we
the
found that little,
digest cookies. Yeah,
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 the
yeah.
digestive cookies, and also there was that stall that me and you used to go to, with the sweets. Sort of, was it rice cakes or
Oh
something?
yeah, yeah. It's like a fried rice cake called hot dog. Yeah, I made
Yeah,
those. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was hooked on that too. That was an everyday thing my first year in Korea. It's so cheap, like 1,000 won, like less than
mm,
$1, right? And just nice and hot, especially in the winter, a nice snack.
yeah. I'm getting fond memories of that. Yeah, and very friendly owner of that stall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're always excited to see you. They always ask, Josh, 어디 가세요? Oh yeah, he went back to England. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or he went to China, and they're like, China, it's too cold to cycle. Oh my God. Like, no, no, he was in Siberia. He'll be all right in the winter. That was the funniest part. I'd tell my friends, like, I've got a friend, Josh, that's cycling in to Seoul from the coast in the winter, and they were like, "It's so cold. It's the winter. How is he cycling in Korea in the winter?" I'm like, "No, no, he was camping in Siberia. He'll be fine."
Although saying that, I did find the cold in Korea different to the cold in Russia, and actually, I felt colder in some respects in Korea than in Russia because it was a damper cold, and you get that sort of coastal air coming in, which is wetter and feels colder. Whereas in Siberia, it's very dry there actually. So it's a dry cold. So if you wrap up warm, you can survive it.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Yeah. Yeah, South Korea can get cold. Yeah, you go hiking in the winter, and wow, it's a different cold for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. And then so after you came, stayed with me for a bit in Korea, and then
Yeah.
I remember you saying, "Okay, I need to get out. I'm feeling comfortable here in Seoul. It's a nice place to live, but I need to get out of my comfort zone a little more." So you took the boat to China, and then you cycled in China a bit, and
Yeah.
cycled
Started.
along the North Korean border too, right? So how was that whole experience?
I remember getting on the boat to China, and it was just filled with Chinese people who'd bought Korean cosmetics and were going to sell them for cheap in China. You had men with raspy coughs smoking cigarettes, unboxing and reboxing Korean makeup, and I thought that was a hilarious kind of image. Yeah, so my plan was always to get to Beijing, and I got the boat to China, and I thought, well, I can spend a week going straight to Beijing and finish my ride, but that's a bit boring. And I need to explore China a bit. And China and North Korea share a border, and I thought I'd follow that border all the way up and then loop back around to Beijing. I mean, it was fascinating. There's a road that goes pretty much level with the border, and the border of China and North Korea is quite simple. In the middle, there's a dormant volcano, extinct volcano, called Mount Pektu, and within that is a lake, and out of that lake flow two rivers. One goes southwest and the other goes northeast, and the border follows these rivers. So I would be cycling along on this road with the river to my right and then North Korea beyond that. and just peering over into this country that, you know, we've heard so much about, but really know so little about in some ways. Fascinating things that I saw. Probably the weirdest thing was this city which looked to be fake. It was this big city, but it was completely empty, and there were no cars, no people, no lights on or anything. And above this big banner, which I think you translated for me, it said something like "Glory to our socialist government" or something similar. But from what I gather, it was just a city that was built just for show, just to impress the Chinese people on the other side, but served no real purpose. Seeing the Korean villages, I mean, they were quite small, looked quite poor, and just the contrast. On the one side, you had China and just all this light and opulence, really, and then the river, and then just blackness on the other side at night, with these little villages with the occasional gas light or something providing a bit of light, or the lone light of a motorbike that's just going along by the side of the road. So yeah, it was just such a contrast to see over into North Korea. Everyone seemed to be walking or cycling. I didn't really see any cars. And people seemed to be walking quite briskly and stiffly, and they were all very well dressed. There was no casual clothes. Everyone was in a shirt and trousers.
Wow, yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the lights too in China, and the lack of light in North Korea, because if you listen to some stories of North Korean defectors, they often cross the river into China, and they always talk about seeing the light and the electricity in China, you know, because it's so dark in North Korea, and they just think like, wow, I wonder what's there. It must be such a prosperous place, and they end up risking their lives and crossing the river. And
well, this is what I thought about, because, you know, China is supposedly a communist country. North Korea is, you know, a communist country. So they're supposedly under the same regime and same ideologues, but they're palpably so different. And I just wonder what the North Koreans think when, you know, they're standing in the river doing their fishing with their little village, and then on the other side, you've just got this massive Chinese town with all the lights. I mean, it must make you question things. And I noticed a lot of the villages and towns were really tucked up away from the river's edge, or round the back of sort of some mountains, or tucked away, almost so that they couldn't see China or couldn't be seen by China. The border was interesting. There was not as heavily policed as I thought it was going to be, but there were cameras everywhere on the Chinese side. And occasionally you'd cycle past the border fence and see a hole where someone had cut a hole through it or climbed through it. The cameras were quite hidden, but at the pace of a touring cyclist, you have time to spot them and see them. And they would be motion censored. So when I cycled past, they'd turn to look at me, which was quite alarming.
Wow. So they were watching you, huh?
Yeah, watching my every move.
Wow. And you camped, right? I think at one point, were you actually in North Korean territory?
Not quite. I was in no man's land between the two. Yeah, it's not quite as impressive, but I came very close to the border on 2 occasions. The first was when I found a gap in the fence by the river, presumably so that a Chinese man could get down to the river and do some fishing or something. And the fence after that is technically no man's land, so I thought, well, I have to go and try. So I went down that track and pitched my tent the other side of the fence. And that was all fine until at night, a guy across the river started flashing his light. And I was like, well, what's going on here? Is he flashing it at me? And I didn't know whether he was friendly or an army person or even like, I don't know, would-be defector trying to communicate with the Chinese side. So I turned my torch. I didn't want to give him any false hopes. I turned my torch off and just went to sleep that night with the sounds of North Korea about 100 meters away, just across the river from me.
Wow.
The second time I camped close by was when I attempted to climb up Mount Pektu, which is called Changbai Shan in Chinese. And I wanted to go up to this lake at the top, which is called Heaven Lake. And I approached, saw that there was a road going up, and I was thinking, well, I might be able to cycle all the way up to the top and camp at the top or something. And I cycled past this police checkpoint, which was empty, so I carried on. And then I carried on cycling, and there was an army base. And I cycled past them. And then the road became snowy. So I had to camp and pitch my tent off into the woods and thought, well, I'll continue on foot the next day. So the next day I walked all the way up this road, almost to the top of this Heaven Lake. I got about 1 kilometer from the top, but the mountain was covered in snow and ice. And I didn't have any gear. I just had a pair of trainers. And I had to climb up this kind of vertical wall. And I thought, this is getting a bit tense because literally no one in the world knows I'm here. And if I fall now, no one's gonna find me. So I came back down and sheepishly went back to my tent. Unfortunately, where my tracks had been in the snow, there was a snowmobile track next to them. And I think they'd been following my footsteps. I got back to my tent and thought, okay, fortunately they hadn't found my tent, or they didn't look like they had. Went to sleep, and then in the middle of the night, you know the story, the Jeep lights come on, they hear the sound of dogs. Man comes over and starts rustling my tent, and I say, okay, go to get my passport out. And then they snap my tent pole in two and it collapses around me. I get out of my tent with my passport first. And once again, for the second time on this trip, wake up to see 3 or 4 men holding guns and axes and wondering what the hell I'm doing camping right next to the North Korean border. They told me to gather all my things up and put them in the back of the police car, and that's what I did. And they took me down to the police station for some interrogation. Unfortunately, none of them could speak English, so they couldn't really interrogate me how they would like to. So the police chief called his nephew up on the phone, and I began having an interrogation by a 14-year-old boy in his pajamas, which I couldn't really take seriously, to be honest, because this guy with this voice that had barely broken, covered in acne, with, I don't know, a Chinese pop star poster behind him, telling me this was a very serious incident and I shouldn't be camping near North Korea. And then slowly, I think we got some mutual respect between me and the police officer. And I think it turned out that they were just more worried about my safety than actually worried about what I was doing. And I told them, yeah, no worries. I've cycled through Russia. I've survived in the cold. I'll be fine. Wow. Eventually, they let me go. And then they asked where I was going to sleep that night. And I said, well, I can't stay in my tent because you've just broken it. And they said, well, that's okay. There's a hotel down the road. And I asked how much it was. And they told me. And I said, no, that's too expensive for me. They said, oh, no worries. We'll pay for your hotel. So I ended the day in this sort of 3-star, 4-star hotel in cotton sheets, having had a shower, having trekked all day at the cost of the Chinese taxpayer. So yeah, it was a strange way to end the day.
Wow. And they snapped your tent pole, like, just like, what's this guy doing here? Like,
yeah,
accident, just total intentional, like.
Yeah, I think so.
Like,
they were ruffling the tent, rustling,
like,
and just it just snapped around me. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wow. So yeah, what were you thinking when when the authorities came, did you think, okay, like
I thought I'm in some
wrong
trouble now.
again? Or is that
Yeah, I thought I'm in some real trouble now. Because I didn't know I probably shouldn't be where I was.
yeah, you knew you were taking a bit of a risk.
I was a bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
just
then the worst thing is so I never made it to this Heaven Lake. And then the next day I found, there's this other way up on the Chinese side. And that's the approved way. You pay your money for the coach and they drive you up, and then you pay a bit more money and they take you on a snowmobile up to the top of the Heaven Lake. So I paid all this money and did it in the normal touristy way. Got to the top, thought, okay, I'm finally going to see this beautiful Heaven Lake. And it was cloudy and I couldn't see anything. So I've still never set my eyes on Heaven Lake, on Pektu Mountain, and I don't know if I ever will.
yeah. Well, you haven't even, I'm sure the story of camping right there is even beats the view that you might
Perhaps,
see on
yeah.
a sunny day, a clear day. Wow. Okay. So, oh man, that's quite a story. So the border guards, they let you go. You spend one night in the hotel, the
Mhm.
3-4 star hotel. And
Yeah, tried to go up the next day with the tourists, didn't see anything, and just thought, right, Heaven Lake is not for me. I'm going to cycle away.
wasn't meant to be.
No, exactly.
Wow. Wow. All right. And then let's go to your arrival in Beijing. So 2 years, 25,000 kilometers. Tell us about the arrival to Beijing and the journey to Beijing.
Yeah, so I guess that final bit of China was quite uneventful once I got away from the North Korean border. So I had a lot of time to think about my arrival and my thoughts. It was a strange thing because I'd built it up in my head for so long. Get to Beijing, get to Beijing. And it was the thing that was driving me on so much. And yet when I arrived, it was almost an anticlimax, to be honest. I mean, surprisingly enough, there wasn't a welcome party with a banner on Tiananmen Square waiting for me to arrive. I tried to take a photo and then they just moved me along. And I think that was kind of the humbling thing in a good way. It's just, okay, I've finished my trip and that's about it. It didn't sink in for quite a long time. I mean, you've been at the end of bike tours and you know that you're smelly and you're tired and almost, the first thing you want is a shower. So I was kind of delighted to get to Beijing, actually. I just, all right, okay, I can stop cycling for a few days. Because I'd cycled through Russia and done the whole winter thing and been on quite a few adventures, I didn't have anything left to prove. So when I got to Beijing, I had a real contentment that I've finished cycling and I can do something else, which was quite a liberating feeling, really. I was expecting a massive overpouring of emotion, but that didn't really come. It sounds a bit unsatisfactory, but I just kind of arrived and that was it. And suddenly knew that I didn't want to cycle anymore, which is the power of a goal, really, because for the whole time, Beijing was my goal and it was driving me on. And it was completely arbitrary. I only chose Beijing because it was a long way away. And yet, even though it was completely arbitrary, it still spurred me on to, cycle through Mongolia and risk my life in China or Russia or whatever. But conversely, once it was finished, that was it. I had nothing left to do. And at one point, I thought I'll get to Beijing and carry on and go through Japan and China and other places. But once I got to Beijing, the goal was finished. I was done. And I knew that the trip was over then.
Oh, wow. It's almost like you're like retiring at the top of your game, right? I mean, you've gone through all these challenging experiences, the Pamir Highway, Siberia, and in winter,
Mm.
you know, AK-47s in the middle of the night and Scorpions, and now you're in Beijing, and it's like, okay, this is it, right?
Exactly. I'd only ever cycled when I wanted to, mostly. Yeah. So when I wanted to take rests, I took rests. You know, I took a break in Almaty. I took a break for the World Cup. I took a break in Seoul. So I didn't want to carry on just because I felt I had to. I mean, one part of me thought I'll go to America and cycle across America, and then that will do the whole round the world. But I just sort of thought to myself, well, I wouldn't be doing it because I wanted to. I'd be doing it because I feel I ought to.
Mhm.
And I didn't think that was a good enough reason. So by the time I got to Beijing, I thought, you know what, I'm satisfied. Let's do something different.
Okay, you must have, were you feeling mentally tired too, or emotionally and mentally? Because I found that at the end of my cycling trip, so much happens every day, right? It's kind of, it's hard to take in, and it can be quite taxing.
Very
Cycling.
much so. Yeah, I was very mentally tired by the end. I think cycle touring, a lot of it is low level discomfort. So, you know, you're always slightly smelly, slightly tired, slightly hungry, slightly thirsty. And after a while, you need a good reason to put up with that discomfort. So by the time I got to Beijing, I didn't really have a good reason to put up with that discomfort anymore. And yeah, you're right. Mentally, I was done. I mean, I'd experienced so much that I didn't think I would get anything new from, for example, cycling across America at that time. I mean, I'd go back and do it. I'd definitely do it now, cycle across America. But at that time, I was like, I would just be continuing for the sake of continuing.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure you needed some time to reflect on everything that you've done. And 2 years is a long time, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's taken me a long time to reflect and digest it all as well. You know.
Sure.
I mean, we're 3 years since I finished, and yeah, I finally, I think, digested it and moved on.
Sure, sure. And how was it like adjusting to life, going back home and everything? I mean, you look at your own country differently too. I mean, what were those first weeks like back in England after this big trip?
I've really enjoyed it, actually. I saw it with fresh eyes. I was fortunate that when I got to Beijing and finished cycling, I lived in Beijing for 3 months to, you know, work, and I did most of the post-trip blues there. I had most of that, oh, what am I going to do with my life sort of thoughts when I was in Beijing, which meant that by the time I came back to the UK in September, I'd kind of gotten over that. And I could experience the UK with energy and with freshness. There were some bits I liked, some bits I loved. I didn't like. I mean, you're always gonna appreciate your mum's cooking, I think, when you go home, and little things like driving on the left, strange. You know, every country I'd been to since I left the UK had driven on the right, so I remember I was cycling along and just cycling on the wrong side of the road. Little things like not being able to pay with my phone, which I'd done in China. Being able to understand people's conversations was quite weird. So I remember off the plane, I was getting the bus back to my house, and there was just a woman in front of me having a really mundane conversation about doing the dishes or something. And I was like, actually, I prefer not to be able to understand this. It was just strange to be able to understand every word. And then adjusting to life, being a slave to the watch again was not fun. That's the best thing about cycle touring, is you're not on any deadline except yourself. So having to meet people on time and get up on time and doing all that, you realize just how focused we are on time and fitting things into schedules, which means it goes really quickly. Whereas an hour on the bike feels like a day, whereas an hour on a computer feels like 10 minutes.
Sure, sure. Yeah, when you're out on the bike, right, the sun really becomes your timepiece. It's like it gets dark and you better find a place to camp or ride in the dark if you want to. But yeah, interesting. And so reflecting on this trip, sounds like you've learned a lot. But if you could say, like, what are some skills that you think this cycling epic adventure have given you, and how are you applying those in your life?
I think one thing it gave me is a lot of self-confidence to just try things and do things, and things probably work out for the best. You know, when you're on the bike, if something breaks, you just got to try and fix it, or you've got to try and adapt it and overcome it. And I think that gives you a lot of confidence just to try things that you know you possibly can't do, or that you're not done before, but that they'll probably work out. I remember I came back and I applied for a job that I thought I was way underqualified, or I wouldn't have applied for before I left, because I thought I'm way underqualified. But afterwards I thought, actually I can just do this. I'll work it out. I back myself to learn and to adapt. So that was one thing. I've been trying to apply the lessons of generosity and good naturedness in my day-to-day life, which is one thing I found really difficult. After, being invited in for cups of tea and to stay in other countries, I thought, oh, I'll come back and I'll be inviting in random cyclists. But it's really hard to do it, in your own backyard, and when you're worried that people will think you're weird. And I've been trying to use things like couch surfing and host people on warm showers as well, because that's one way you can sort of pass it on and pay it back. And just trying to remember that these people, I was a stranger to these people and they let me in. So being open to strangers is definitely something I've been trying to do more of. I think that's probably the self-confidence and the knowledge that I'll be able to learn and overcome any issues is quite a powerful skill to take away.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure, applying for that job or even learning a new skill, like technical skill set, when you think about it, when you compare it to like sleeping out in the cold in Siberia, it's like, okay, I'll be at a warm computer, I'll have a cup of tea, right? There's a clean bathroom right there. Like, what's so bad about,
exactly,
down and reading a book about a topic that you're trying to learn about or build a skill set, right?
You realize what is actually a challenge and what's not.
Sure.
Yeah, and doing a tax return, that's fine. I can do it.
No wolves are gonna jump out
exactly,
and fight you in the face with it. No AK-47s in your neighborhood, hopefully, at least. Yeah.
Hope not. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is a realization and a verification that the things in my life that I like are being outdoors and being on adventures, and just watching when I haven't been outside for a while, or if I haven't been camping for a while, just to make sure I just force myself to go and do it, because that's what sorts me out.
Yeah, sure. And so what are your future plans? What's on the road ahead for you?
So I had some big plans for 2020 and they all got derailed over the last couple of years, and I'm finally back to realizing them now. So my plan is to do shorter trips. I don't think I'd ever do a 2-year trip again, but shorter trips over a couple of months. So next week I'm going back to Georgia, and I want to cycle around there for a month and a bit. Just I've been meaning to go back. It's been 5 years, and I've always said, oh, I want to go back to Georgia. So I'm going to do some mountain biking there, and then There's a hiking trail in the Balkans that I want to do. I want to get into hiking more, sort of multi-day hikes. I normally travel by bike. That's my default way, but it'd be nice to do something a bit different. And then next year, if all goes to plan, I want to go to Mongolia and buy a horse and try and ride it across Mongolia.
Nice.
So yeah, the plan is to work for say 6 or 7 months of the year and then travel for the rest of the year and balance the two over the next few years.
Nice. Sounds like you got some more exciting adventures ahead of you.
Absolutely, I can't wait.
Nice. All right, well, let's see, we're going pretty long here, so let's do something that I've called the lightning round, if you don't mind. It's
Sure.
impromptu style, just some light, kind of fun questions that you can answer with one word or one sentence. Okay, so first question is, the longest you've ever been without a shower is?
A week.
Okay. The most memorable or unique place you have ever spent the night is?
On the North Korean border.
The most frightening experience during your trip was?
Finding a scorpion in my tent.
The worst meal you had on your trip was?
Oh, frozen pasta and tomatoes in the Pamir Highway.
All right, and the best meal was?
A Georgian feast after a hard day of trail building. Yeah, food with khachapuri, lobio, kinkali, dumplings, meats, cheeses, breads, wine, cha-cha. Fantastic.
Right on. And the most beautiful place you've ever seen is?
That is tricky. Sorry, this is lightning, isn't it? That's not very lightning.
All right, you can take your time.
The Mongolian steppe.
Nice.
Yeah, the steppe in Mongolia.
And how would you describe cycling in the extreme cold in one word? One word to describe it.
Grind.
And
grinding.
How would you describe cycling on the Pamir Highway in one word?
Exhilarating.
How would you describe Russia using one word?
Vast.
How would you describe South Korea in one word?
Organized.
How would you describe my apartment in Seoul in one word?
Cozy.
Oh, thank you. And how would you describe England in one word?
A garden.
All right. That's it. You survived the lightning round. That was pretty easy compared to cycling in Siberia in the winter, I'm sure. So,
or avoiding actual lightning.
Right, that too. So do you have any final words for our audience that have been with us on this adventure here?
I think just to say, and with everything that's happened over the last few years, it's made me really thankful that I decided to go on this trip. And you never know, there's never going to be a perfect time. If you're thinking about changing your life or going on a big trip somewhere, you can't wait for the universe and the stars to align. You just got to make the best of your situation and go for it. And if I didn't do that, if I'd waited a couple of years and said, oh, I'll just wait until I've got a bit more money, then I would have been stuck there during COVID, regretting not going. So my main thoughts is just, I'm really glad I went when I did. And if you're thinking about doing something similar, just do it, because you'll have a great time and it will work out.
Sure. Great advice. And how can people follow you or keep in touch with you?
So I write my blog which is cyclingfordays.bike. And I'm on social media at cycling4days.
All right, perfect. I think that's a great way to end it. It's been a long conversation, but very entertaining for me, and I'm sure it's you've inspired a lot of listeners to, if not go out into Siberia and Tajikistan and in the winter months, at least to explore their neighborhood, get out of their comfort zone a little bit, and try something new before hopefully another pandemic hits, right? Let's keep our fingers crossed. But anyway, thanks, Josh, for joining us here on episode 11 of the Intrepid Global Citizen Podcast. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, George.